Anyway. You're probably going now.
Okay, so the Aristotelian thing goes through identification with a character trait that goes out of balance, and it's through Hermartia. The worst thing is fatal flaw is such a seductive term, but it goes out through by the process of peripeteia, and then you go further down the line to finding anagnorisis, the realization of what you've done wrong, and after that you go to catastrophe. That's in Greek tragedy. Okay, so now we move on and we arrive at Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Okay. Now, I have a long history of never being able to get to the same set of steps. I think they're 12, but I always get it wrong. So just count up as we go, use your own, okay? So with Campbell's thing, what you have is the first stage is called the ordinary world, okay? It's the ordinary world. Now, I always, when I was doing it with actors and young actors at the drama school, I would say, you've got to visualize this as your own story, because sort of fairly early on, I realized that this is not only the structure of a story, it's also the structure of your life. And so it really helps to know this, because it then helps to know where the hell you are in your life. Okay, and what's going wrong. Okay, so the ordinary world, in those terms, if you went to university, if you went into a new job, etc., you would come from a world in which you were completely at home, your ordinary world. And suddenly you receive, number 2, a call to adventure. Okay, calls to adventures, you've got to be, I don't know whether careful of, but you should make a practice of accepting them when they arrive. Because if you don't, then you end up stuck back where you were. Okay, so if we want to look at those through various things, you have Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, in the wonderful ordinary world of Kansas in black and white. And then she receives one of the all-time great calls to adventure when she's picked up by a tornado and dumped in the cinemascope and color world of Oz. Okay, so the ordinary world and the call to adventure. Now, the call to adventure then has a couple of extra little things, which is probably where I always get confused. But the one is called the meeting with a mentor.
Is this within call to adventure?
Yeah, just number them your own way, whatever makes sense to you. Meeting with a mentor. Really, that's you meet with somebody who's going to give you advice, give you help in some way. Dorothy gets given the red shoes, which she doesn't even know why. Obi-Wan Kenobi gives him the lightsaber. Am I correct in that, or I got the wrong thing? Excalibur, all of those kind of weapons, but also sometimes knowledge. And when I was doing this with young drama students, I'd say, you applied to the drama school from your ordinary world, and then you get accepted. And you run up and down the wall screaming and shouting with joy, and then you come down and you think, oh my God, they're all going to be better than me, etc., etc. Will I survive? And at that stage, either your best friend says, oh, for God's sake, of course you can make it, or a teacher that was regular with you said, you're good enough, go. Or your parents say, we've paid, get out of the house, So those are meetings with mentors. And then you go to the next phase, which is called crossing the first threshold. Now, just think of it in terms of this course, which was you were sitting comfortably in your ordinary world when suddenly this thing came saying, they're doing this course on writing. That was your call to adventure. I don't know whether you had any mentors or meetings with people that said one thing or the other. But then you're crossing the first threshold is when you manage to find your way into this building, which is not easy.
Yeah.
So crossing the first threshold and you're there. So you cross the threshold from the ordinary world into the extraordinary world, the new world. Okay. And the minute you do that, you're now on the road of trials. That's the next number, the road of trials. Now the road of trials is generally the vast bulk of the story. Okay, and you've all been through it, and the thing is you go through this in maxi scales and mini scales. And everything you ever do has the same cyclical thing. Everything you go through. Andrea paints, when you start a painting, you go through all of these various phases in your own way. You're an actor, and when you go through that, every new script that comes your way, you go through the same set of things. And the road of trials is inside that area of rehearsal. Now, on the road of trials, you are tested, and really what's happening is that you're being taught how to cope. You've been given the skills to cope, and you've been given these skills by meeting up with all kinds of people, all kinds of characters.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
This is on the road of trials.
Still on the same thing, yeah. Still on the road.
Yeah. If you just go back to Dorothy, what road does she end up on? The yellow brick road. They're more bigger than that. Yeah, just a little sidelight is that the man that wrote it actually did it as a piece of satire on some governor that was being elected, and he did it as, and everybody then understood it was satire about this governor, who obviously was, the wizard with no clothes. And he was completely stunned when it turned into one of the all-time great stories. Okay, so you go down that line and you start meeting archetypal characters. On this course, I'm not going to go into archetypal characters. These are things you need to research outside of this, because it takes just far too long to work our way through that. But just to get a few, and just also to realize one thing. There are a whole bunch of archetypal characters, but what you should always think about is not this is one, that's one, that's one, that's one. You should think of yourself as a pie chart yourself, and you'll find that all of them are in there. So, hero, shade, shapeshifter, all the various different kinds, and you've got X amount of each. I've got about a very, very tiny sliver of hero. And actually not that much shade, but there are other areas of me that are much bigger. Okay, the biggest slice being something called a threshold guardian.
Threshold guardian.
Threshold guardian. So you've got the hero, you've got the shade, you've got the threshold guardian, you've got the shapeshifter, you've got the trickster, you've got the messenger. Shame, really boring one. Just comes in to deliver messages. And there are several others. Just if you work your way through, if you go back to Jung, for instance, you'll find that his character archetypes are these. That's roughly what you're looking at. And the thing to understand is that one person can contain them all. If we go to Star Wars, where our ordinary world is on, oh God, what's some weird planet called Tatooine or something? I don't know, I can't remember. I saw it way back in the 70s. And Luke gets a call to adventure, which he refuses. Oh dear, there I go again. Go back to number 2. It's called the refusal of the call.
Oh, you get your refusal. So a refusal as well.
Yeah, there's a refusal. There's a refusal. Now you don't always have a refusal of the call, but it sort of helps.
So you tend to refuse the first one.
Yeah. And when I was talking about getting overexcited about being accepted into a drama course, that's a sort of refusal. It's a refusal out of fear. And just in a little bit of refusal of the call, there's a famous film which some of you will have seen, which it's a comedy, which has one of the longest refusals of a call ever. Anybody think of what it could possibly be? It's a romantic comedy, and it has a refusal of a call which is stunningly long.
Something like Harry Met Sally.
That's
or,
it.
Yeah.
There you go. It's when Harry met Sally. They meet. They very obviously, to all of us, fall in love, but they both refuse it, and then they go off on their own two journeys through life, meet up right at the end of their lives again, and suddenly realize, So what I bring that up for is you can use these whichever way you want to. It doesn't have to go this, then that, then that, then that. Okay. So, sorry about that. Refusal of the call. Number 2, meeting with a mentor generally is the one that gets you to accept the call. Crossing the first threshold, the road of trials, on which you meet all these characters. Now, in South Africa, where I come from, when we saw Star Wars, there wasn't a single person in the audience who didn't know who the hell Darth Vader was, because in Afrikaans, V-A-D-E-R is father. It means father. So you thought, oh, he's the Dark Father. Who could he possibly? Oh, it must be him. You know, it was just simple. We knew it way in advance, and I'm sure they did in Germany and Holland, where they have Vater, and so that way. Anyhow, but if you look at Darth Vader, he starts off as the Shade, a really, really bad dark shade, but then he turns into a mentor for his son. That's another one of the archetypal characters. A mentor for his son. He's also a shapeshifter as he shifts from one thing to another. He's also a trickster. And he's a threshold guardian. Now, threshold guardians require a teeny bit of explanation, because it's a really fascinating character. So, in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy gets kidnapped. She's in Emerald City, isn't she? I directed The Wiz, which is slightly different from The Wizard of Oz, so I always get my head in a knot. But it is Emerald City, and the friends go to think. Now think of the friends. You have who?
The lion.
The lion.
Tin Man.
The Scarecrow.
Scarecrow. And what do each of them lack? The lion.
Courage.
Tin Man.
Heart.
And Scarecrow.
Brain.
So what you're looking at is a whole thing of stuff that actually Dorothy also needs. So you're looking at the journey towards finding that. Right. So the three friends now have to get into Emerald City and rescue her. It is Emerald City, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Probably, I'm not.
I think.
I mean, it's the
Makes sense.
wicked witch
Yeah,
of the
it's
west
all-
or the north or the east. I can't remember, because
West.
her house lands on one of the wicked witches right at the beginning and kills
Yeah,
her. doesn't
which
it?
is Witch of the East,
Yeah.
and that's how she
So
gets
it's
the
the west, I
slips.
think. Then.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Is
Gets
it Linda?
I don't know
Linda.
that well, actually.
Yeah.
It's
It's all a
really
bit
kind
kind of
Oh, the red
mixed.
mixed.
Anyhow, so
Anyway.
what you have is these three. Now they have to get in. So does anybody remember how they get in to this castle, into this area?
I can't remember. Is it magic?
Okay.
They-
well,
Oh no,
what-
they probably use their. They
They
have to
use
develop
their-
their. They have to
they
develop
develop
their
their
skills
skills.
to get in.
Yeah,
Have a heart,
but there's a way that they do, and you have all these guards, threshold guardians, saying no, you can't come in here, and so what they do is they mug them, and they steal their clothes, so they get in as guards, and that's the very important thing. Now, why is that important? Well, back at Mountview, I had a guy who was just one of the best acting teachers I've ever come across. And he was amazing, because when you inherited a cast from him afterwards, they were acting like 1,000 times better. They were focused, they were passionate about what they were doing. And there was just one little problem, they all looked like him. And that was fine, as long as you could drag them away from that into something. And if you think of art classes, you know, I don't know whether, you know, what's happened now, but at one stage when you went into an art school, you were taught to draw like Goya, like whatever. You were taught to do that, so that you learned how to do that, and then your job after that is to find your own style. And all of those people like Goya and all of those, they're threshold guardians. You've got to get past them. So you become them, and then you get past them. So you've taken on all their techniques, you've taken on all their stuff. And threshold guardians are really important in the stories. They come up frequently in those times. Okay. So we're on the road of trials where you are learning all kinds of wonderful things and honing your skills for the big battle that is to come. Okay. Now we reach the a stage which is called the approach to the inmost cave. Cave.
The innermost cave.
Yeah. It's got various different titles, but I'll use that one. I always think of it really in terms, because I think mostly in terms of plays and novels. It's sort of a rhythmical thing. It's almost like you've gone through the road of trials where a whole bunch of stuff has happened. And then you have this moment when you settle down and gird your loins for going forward. And you actually have to have that, because, you know, rhythmically for the whole thing to work properly. In terms of if you're an actor, then you go through the whole rehearsal period, you go through the road of trials of the rehearsal, and then there comes a time at about 2-3 days before you're due to open when you sort of hopefully got it. And there's a moment when you, in a sense, almost jogging on the spot. It's taking your breath, getting ready for the next phase. Okay, and the next phase is the supreme ordeal.
I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings when you're saying this.
Yeah, well, Lord of the Rings has everything in this. It's one of the great expositions. That's why it's such a great book. It's one of the great expositions of all the stages that we're looking at here. But all of the great books, you know, I liked the Harry Potter thing, but I found that she was writing a little bit too much, though I never got to book 3, which my son-in-law, who was a great fan as well, said, no, it only really gets to book 3 is amazing. So one day I should actually read book 3, but I read book 1 and then I thought, no, it was fun, but I didn't want to go any further with that, you know. But those kind of stories, okay?
I read all of them.
That's probably why I got knocked back by 12 publishers.
We will not get into publishers here.
That was
Okay.
the Supreme Ordeal.
Supreme Ordeal. Okay, so the Supreme Ordeal is the big fight, the big battle, etc., etc. And it's what, you know, the whole area is into. And if you just think of any one of the big films, the big things, and as a matter of fact, you quite frequently don't have one Supreme Ordeal, you have a set of them. I mean, I think in Star Wars you've got a whole bunch of battles they go through with various things happening. You know, it's that, but it can just be one. Now, okay, when you've got through that, and you sort of have to win, otherwise nobody's going to read your book. Okay, you get the reward. Okay, now the reward can be anything. Jason went off and got the golden fleece. You know, one off the other, there are all kinds of things. This system works as well with romantic comedy as it does with anything else. You get love. You
get the girl.
You get the girl, or the boy, whichever way you're going around it. And that's the reward. So the golden fleece, but mostly it's you gain knowledge. So if you're doing a course of any kind, you do your course, and at the end of which you have a big exam, and you pass the exam, and as a result you get a diploma or whatever, a degree, and you've got all of that knowledge. Okay. Then we get into the next phase, and this is called the road back. You thought we were over.
Yeah,
We have hardly just begun. If you don't have a lot of paper, we're going to have to find you some,
Yes, I
because
know.
the writing starts after this, and then you're going to fill up pages at a frightening rate.
Developing the paper anxiety.
Do you want a bit of it?
Well, not now, no.
No.
At some point.
You'll see.
I know I
Okay.
need to-
So the road back. Now the road back is utilized in various ways for various reasons. Hollywood and some of the Greek playwrights use it for the same thing. If you think of Orestes, who's going back after he's done horrible things to his mother, and he's pursued by the Furies. Okay, that's on the road back. One of my favorite road backs comes in Pulp Fiction. Okay, when I was first doing this course way back in the 80s, everybody was going, "Oh my God, isn't Reservoir Dogs amazing?" And I'd watched it, and I actually couldn't watch it. I sort of got bored very quickly because I was just watching 4 actors showing off. But when I said this to my class, who were aghast that I hated it, somebody said, but have you seen Pulp Fiction? Because it's got everything we're talking about. And it happened to be on telly the following week, so we all studied and watched it, and then discussed it in our next class. And it is utterly brilliant, with a single exception of you really shouldn't plunge a thing into somebody's chest. I really think that's a bad idea. But everything else is there, except that he plays these wonderful games with them. They're all over the place. There are time differences, there are all kinds of things. But in these terms, this wonderful road back, they have a supreme ordeal in which there was Travolta. Who was the other guy with Travolta?
Samuel L. Jackson.
Samuel
Yes.
And they have this big fight against the baddies, and they sort of win, and they run away. And they get in a car, and they're travelling back down the road, and you've relaxed because, oh, thank God, we're out of that.
Yes.
And then, this is my favourite ever piece of peripeteia, they stop to let somebody walk across a level crossing, a traffic crossing, who turns out to be the 2 people that they've just, or the 3 people that the baddies. And bang, they go back into another chase. Okay, Hollywood was very big on chase sequences. One of my favourites back in a long time ago was called Bullet, where they had these incredible car chases around San Francisco, those enormous hills. Who was it? Steve McQueen, I think. Anyhow, so you have the road back. Now the road back is the road back to your society. This is where it always used to fall to pieces when I was teaching young actors, because the vast majority really didn't want to go back home.
Yeah.
But that's as it is. So the road back to your society. Now, along that road, a couple of things can happen. Now, if you can find one, it's called the hero's sacrifice. If you can find a hero's sacrifice, a convincing hero's sacrifice in your story, it raises the quality of your story from one level to a completely different one. And in that level, it's the Jesus thing, sacrificing himself upon the cross so that we all can live. And it's that much. I mean, if you get somebody to sacrifice themselves so that other people can live, you're going to have a whole bunch of weeping people in the audience. But quite frequently in romantic comedy, you have a moment when one or other of the partners thinks, I think I'd better leave because he or she is not going to be good with me, and it would be better for them if I wasn't in their life. That always chokes me up. Always chokes me up. So it doesn't have to be kill myself or get killed, but a lot of the really famous ones are that. If there's a hero sacrifice. Yeah. Now, Tolstoy was very big
very
on
good at
all
this.
of this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then after that, you get to the phase which is called the return with the ELIXIR, ELIXIR.
The return. Sorry.
The return with the elixir.
Right.
What's an elixir?
Wonderful.
Well,
Delicious
I
potion.
Mm.
Potion thing.
A
Special
healing, it's a
power.
healing medicine, really. Okay, the return with the elixir. When I first started doing it, I really didn't understand it terribly much. I understood people bringing back knowledge and things like that, and that seemed fine. Until one day I found myself in the middle of a class suddenly saying, actually, where I come from, and this was in the sort of middle 1990s, there was a hero who had this incredible 27-year incarceration on an island, an enormous supreme ordeal, and then was finally let out to come on the road back to his country. And when he came back to his country, he said, in my hands here, I have the healing medicine. This will heal us. But, he said, there's a condition attached to this. In order for this to heal us, we all have to take it. All whites, all blacks, Nelson Mandela obviously. All have to take it. And then he opened his hand, and in the palm was lying 3 words: I forgive you. Now that's a medicine which, from one side of the divide, looks sort of totally simple, and from the other side of the divide looks really impossible. And you know, I remember when that first came out and the thing called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up, which was a thing where people came and told their stories so that they could be shared and understood and seen, validated. But, you know, as a white South African, saying I forgive you to black South Africans was sort of really hollow. I had a really good life. And the good life was based on the fact that a lot of people were not having a really good life. And none of those people had ever done anything to me that I needed to forgive them for. But actually, he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the black South African groups and saying, if we want to go forward, we have to forgive them.
Was he not also
Otherwise, we'll never go
talking to
forward.
Was he not also talking to the white South African leaders? We, people like
Yeah.
you, forgiving if it's possible to forgive
Yeah.
those people who continue with the apartheid.
Oh,
Do you see what I mean?
yeah,
I mean, it's difficult, but
yeah,
asking you to do
Yeah.
that as well as the black
Yeah.
people of South Africa,
yeah.
which is a really big one.
Yeah, it's an easier big one though. Why? Okay, let me tell you why. In 1974, the riots started in a very small level before the really big 1976 thing. Sorry, this is 1975. And I was running this theatre in Cape Town, South Africa. And one day, we had a resident playwright called Fatima Dike. And Fats had been working in a butcher shop, and she was a poet. And we knew that we'd like to get her involved, and she was always around the theatre. And so we asked her to join us as a sort of trainee resident playwright, but in order to do that, she had to become the worst stage manager the world has ever seen, Mr. Bart, because she really had no ability to be what a stage manager has to be. And she was lovely, and she started writing plays for us. Okay. One day in 1975, Fats arrived in my office, and she was a very jolly lady, but she was actually grey, and she wouldn't look me in the eye. And she said to me, could I speak to you and Dimitri, who was the other guy running the place with me, and I could actually just feel coming off her this vibe which was really serious. So I went and hauled him out of a rehearsal that he was rehearsing a play. I went and got him out and suddenly sat with her, and she still couldn't look at us. And she said this morning, she said, I was standing in front of my house, and it was a Thursday. And on Thursdays what would happen is that people would come in from around the place, and there'd be a whole bunch of unemployed young black guys, and this was completely illegal, but nobody gave a damn. And then they would say, okay, you and you, and get on the back of my bucky, my little van, and you will have a day or two's work. And every day, like 200, 300, 400 of these would gather, and about 20 or 30 would get a job. In fact, it was a terrible flirt, so she used to, 200, 300 captive males, then she was standing there chatting with them, etc. And then suddenly something went wrong. They were standing outside, they gathered at the police station, okay? And the police station was surrounded with barbed wire, etc. And so somebody started insulting the police answered back, and then this escalated, and somebody outside threw rocks into the police station, and the police started firing. Fats retreated into her house and was standing watching, just seeing the street in front of her, and she said, this man that came running past, he was laughing, he was running, and suddenly, pow, his head just vanished. And he said the body kept running for about 3, 4, 5 paces and then fell. And she said his brains were all over the place, and she pointed at her jacket and said, there's some of the blood. And said it took my mother and I nearly an hour to clear our garden.
Oh.
And then she looked at us for the first time, and it was really not one of my favourite ever times. She said, I've come in here today to tell you that I hate you. And if I hadn't have come in here today, I would never be able to come into this theatre ever again. And she walked out, leaving 2 utterly shattered young white men. So, yeah, I've got to forgive her for that. She's got to forgive me for that. Wow.
What did happen in that story, the real story? Did she come back?
Oh yeah, no, she came back, yeah. The really interesting thing about that is she wrote it in a book a while later, and you just can't trust anybody because she very clearly in the book says, in 1976 or 77, I think she puts it, this happened to me, and I actually at one stage thought, no, this is, I can actually remember exactly where I was, and we happened to have moved in late 1975 to a new venue. And I remember sitting in my office with her, and I thought, am I getting that old that I've completely forgotten? And then fortunately I got hold of Dimitri and said to him, do you remember when Fat started? Yeah. I said, and I said, just describe it to me. He said, well, I was rehearsing upstairs and I came into your office and said it was the old space. Yeah, he said it was the old space. So Fat's got it wrong, but there you go. But a really powerful story about that, forgiveness. Okay. That's the return with the elixir, coming back with something which will change people.
So that would be that, her coming in and telling you that is her return with the elixir, in the sense it changed things. Could it be?
It could be, but on my level it was
No,
supreme audio.
So the elixir isn't
still going on.
The elixir is something.
No, it was Mandela coming back and saying this
elixir,
is the healing medicine. We have to tell.
So it's always a healing medicine. It's not necessarily a transformative piece of information for the better or the worse.
Yes, it can be that. It can be that. I mean, I'd say that Mandela's one is sort of one of the top ones.
Yeah. Yes.
And then it just goes down the list as to, some are much smaller. Some are just a small lesson that you've learned.
Mm-hmm.
It's just important to do that. So if you work your way through all of those, then you end up with the hero's journey.
Lovely.
all of those. I don't know if anybody's been numbering these. What did you come to?
Oh, well,
got 11.
no.
I've got 11.
You got 11.
Well, but then there was a few added in. Yeah.
Are you
Two could be
counting the
12.
refusal? You're counting the refusal of the call.
Oh, it'd be so 2 had 3 parts, so I had 2A, 2B and 2C. Oh yeah, there would be 11. The meeting with the mentor and refusing the call.
Anyhow, I never know. I'll look it up in the book. I always say that and then I forget. Anyhow, but so that's the basic thing. So why do I teach the 2? Well, because in a lot of stories they leave out anagnosis, realization. And it's really, really important not to leave that out of your story. So in order to give you an idea as to why it's so important, we will look at what I call the problem of Iago.
Yes.
Okay. We'll start off with the problem of Desdemona, because it'll probably be quite interesting to you. In my eyes...
If I could sorry to interrupt you, would I be able to have a toilet break at this point?
Can you wait a
Yes,
little bit longer, because then we'll break.
Okay, fine.
But if you have to go, you have
No,
to
no,
go.
sorry.
The problem with Desdemona, she's either the most boring character the world has ever seen, because, I mean, for God's sake, you know, she's wimpy and vapid, and she ends up allowing the man to kill her. And I've on several occasions sat with a group of actors and said, you know, do you love anybody enough in your life to allow them to kill her? Because she does allow them. She doesn't run away. She knows what's going to happen, and she allows it. And so that makes her very weird and boring, unless you look at it from another case, the side of things, and you look at the history. If you look at the beginning, you never see her mother. You hardly hear about it. There are about 3 references to her mother, including the song at the end. And she obviously hates her father.
Yeah.
Okay, very obviously. And in doing that, she selects the lover that is absolutely the polar opposite of what her father would want. And then at the end, she allows him to kill her, and suddenly, for me, she becomes a really, really interesting, self-destructive character who is carried by a whole thing. And the minute you start looking at that, then I think, oh, I'd like to work on this Desdemona as opposed to Vapid Blonde. Okay. Now, Iago, on the other hand, is the other thing. Now, I have seen... well, I don't go anymore because I just get bored. Iago steps on the stage and you look at him and you think, oh, scumbag. You know, he's a horrible man. You know, I wouldn't buy a second-hand car from him. However, he's surrounded by characters who are saying in Shakespearean language, wonderful Iago, lovely Iago, great Iago, isn't it? Iago, fantastic, I love Iago. 15 different times there are references to how amazing Iago is, because he is. Iago isn't a villain. But everybody plays in that, and that's lazy acting and lazy directing. They take him on and say, you know, because actors love playing villains. You know. Everybody, you know, boo and hiss. The problem for me is that if you turn Iago into that, then I'm not interested anymore, because we're dealing with a fairy tale. And Othello isn't a fairy tale. It's a great play. Except that every time I see it, on he steps and I think, oh God, you're a scumbag, and who cares about you? Actually, for me, what Shakespeare was doing, probably not at all consciously, was saying, okay, who are we going to identify with? So we start off with this man. And this man is a very, very good fighter. He's the person you want next to you on a battlefield to cover your back. He's Othello's favorite on that level. But then Othello makes this teeny-weeny mistake, and it's not a mistake, it's the thing. He doesn't appoint him to the role of, I can't remember what Cassio gets, is it the governor of Cyprus or Crete or whatever, I can't remember. he doesn't give him that job. He doesn't even think about giving that job because he's not that kind. And so Iago starts resenting him for doing that. And so what you've got there is that character trait which goes out of balance. It goes from resentment. And you then, if you start looking, because that happens almost before the play has started, because in his very first monologue, he's telling you that. You know, he's already down the road, but you can see where he's come from. And then you watch this man slowly turn himself into this, what ends up as a killing machine. And he does incredible things. For instance, he's talking about Iago, about Othello and Desdemona, and Emilia, his wife, Iago's wife, Emilia. One of the best roles ever to play. It always wins awards. And he says something along the lines, I'm not good at quotes, but 'tis rumoured abroad that betwixt my sheets he has done my office. In other words, 'tis rumoured that he slept with my wife. He doesn't say, I think he slept with her. He says, 'tis rumoured abroad that. And then he goes on, and he actually says, I don't believe that. But, and this is, I wish I could remember these quotes. He says, I am going to believe that for what I am. And you watch him slowly tip himself out of balance. And you end up with him surrounded by, now Cassio's dead, Rodrigo's dead, Othello's dead, Emilia, his wife, is dead, and Desdemona. He's surrounded by the sea of corpses. And at that stage, people display him dead, and he goes off. But actually, if you look at it, it's quite easy for him to put in a thing of looking at it. Somebody says to him, look, you varlet, or something, I can't remember the line, look what you've done. And all the actor has got to put in is that moment of recognition of what he's done. He's killed everybody, including his wife. And then he says, I'm never going to speak again. So as far as I'm concerned, that's what you should be doing with Iago, but instead it's so much easier to play him as a villain and reduce the play to a fairy tale. That's the power of an agnoris as a recognition.
Okay.
You have to have that to turn it into something that is useful. So in other words, the play is saying, be careful everybody, and I'm absolutely positive that Wool didn't sit there and think, I'm going to write a play which teaches people to be careful. He just wrote the bloody play. But what the play seems to me to be doing is saying, just be careful. Resentment at being passed over a job, and I mean, come on, does any of you ever felt that?
Yep.
By any chance? Could lead, if you don't control it, to something really bad. And for me, that means the play has got something. Now, before we break, we just get to the final thing, which is messages. Oh, God. In my early days, people kept saying to me, oh, God, you're always saying everything's got a message. And one day I just absolutely blew up, and I said, of course everything's got a message. Why do you do art of any kind? Is to communicate something. What do you communicate? A message about something. I find this beautiful, I find this awful, I find this, and you communicate a message. That's what art does. Everything has a message, and you have to be really careful as to what the message is that you're putting across. I really drum this into young actors, because they'll end up playing something, and that something will affect somebody, and they will be putting across a message which really will not be great. And they've got to understand what it is. Okay? The worst things for me are in soap operas. Soap operas go out, and in the 80s when I first came here, like 14 to 18 million people a night were watching Coronation Street. And I loved it, it was a lovely cartoon. I don't like where all of them have gone now that everybody's always been murdered or, But in those days it was a comedy. It was, it was lovely and it was quite fun. However, when I was doing one of these courses in which we were studying the effect of that kind of thing, we had everybody, some people looked at children's comedy, children's things on the telly, we looked at books, we looked at films, and we looked at soap operas. And we happened to have a storyline on Coronation Street. There was the lovely Gail, who had a husband called Brian, and Brian went off and had an affair. So to cheers around the nation, she threw him out, leaving herself with 2 young children to bring up. And this was in no case of I was doing this in 1986 when there were still remnants of feminism around. And it's very sad that that has sort of gone, but there seems to be, it's coming back again, thank God. But at that stage it was very hardcore indeed. And so everybody was cheering, oh, it's dealing with the problems of a single parent. We thought, what better thing can a soap opera do than put that up there and say, and because for me, a lot of what you do in theatre and writing and everything is create in people the thing which says, thank God I'm not alone. And if you can do that, then things just work. You actually say to people, don't worry, there are other people who know what you feel like. We've all been there. Okay, so this went on for 2 weeks while we were studying all kinds of bits and pieces. And then, to our complete and utter horror, she took him back. And the message, as was very clear to everybody, was that no matter what, the nuclear family is all, and you should suffer. Take him back. This caused, I can't tell you what outrage in my class. And I sat back and thought, oh come on, that's what this thing has now said to all single mums out there. Don't sit there being single. Take your bastard husbands back. That's a terrible message, eh?
People do all the time, though.
Yeah, they do all the time, but they shouldn't probably.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't.
Yeah.
The Thatcherite 10 years.
It was.
She went in 1990, so it was in that.
It was in that area.
The family is the.
I think
thing.
I imagine there's probably
Could there be a thing though for? My question would be, so she takes him back. It's the worst thing she could do, and then that gets worse. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to resolved it.
Yeah,
to tell you the truth, I can't quite remember what happened. I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
well, Brian suddenly went off to America, the actual actor, and tried to make it in Hollywood, which he didn't. So they took him out. I can't remember whether they killed him or for what, But the thing is, they did bring them back, and they did play Happy Families for a while. And soap opera people have got to be very, very careful of what they do. We had that thing with that little girl who had the baby, and at first it was a storyline that you should be looking at, but then at one stage I was looking at them and I was saying, they're making this look so easy. Yeah, have a baby. Yeah, it's easy to go. And I started losing faith in that. So, anyway. Okay, that's this morning's thing. What is the time, anybody? How was Vegas idea?
12:10.
12. What we'll do is we'll actually take our lunch break now.
Okay.
Because after lunch, I stop talking, you'll be glad to hear, and you start writing. Which you probably won't be glad.
No.
Okay. So, shall we meet up again at 1 o'clock? 50 minutes.